Well, guess what? At the end of today's episode, we are gonna try some pumpkin bread made with espresso, but we're also gonna have one that doesn't have espresso powder in it and do another blind taste test.
We get to wear our masks again.
We get to wear those awesome masks again. We just really wanted to get our money's worth from Amazon.
I think I still have mine.
Oh, perfect.
Coming up, the little treat culture on TikTok, the surprising ingredient that people are now putting into their pumpkin bread, and tips on baking in cold weather. All that and everything else you need to know. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Need to Know. I'm Gemma Stafford, professional chef, host of Bigger Bolder Baking and cookbook author. And as always, I have my two lovely ladies with me. Gemma and her lovely ladies. That's kind of weird. I won't say that. My co-host, Shukla, who is our culinary director here at Bigger Bolder Baking. And then we have Tianna, who is an amateur baker, but a professional host. And she has a lot of fantastic topics to talk about today. So Tianna, I'm going to get comfy and let me have it.
Let's do it. Let's just jump right into hot from the oven today. We're talking about pumpkin bread. So obviously pumpkin bread is really big this time of year. And I've been seeing a ton of recipes online and TikTok about people making their pumpkin bread, but I've been seeing consistently this quote unquote secret ingredient, which is putting espresso powder in your pumpkin bread. And I wanted to know if you've ever heard of that or if you've ever tried it.
I haven't heard of it. I haven't tried it. That's interesting.
Yeah, I know a few episodes ago we talked about how coffee can enhance the flavors of certain things, but we really talked about how it enhances chocolate and things like that. Mm-hmm. So my brain went, okay, it kind of makes sense because it probably enhances the flavor, but I just wanted to know maybe how, right?
I think it's really interesting because it definitely, I find coffee pairs really well with caramels and maple and lives in that kind of world. So to have it with pumpkin is, I'm sure it's lovely, but it's definitely not what I would have sprung to my mind.
Well, what also pairs really well with caramels is pumpkin. So all those kind of warm spiced flavors, coffee can add sort of think about when you have a coffee flavored ice cream, it's almost bitter, but also a little caramelly in taste. So coffee definitely has those caramel flavor notes. It has a sort of bitter backbone that supports chocolate, but I wouldn't, pumpkin bread tends to be pretty sweet and spiced. So I would think that a little bit of structure of flavor that the coffee lends would be really good. And just think about pumpkin spice lattes. Just that whole flavor of pumpkin and coffee.
Yeah, I need to know what.
That's hugely popular.
I was like, wait, how does that apply? But duh, espresso.
I thought the same. I was like, there's no coffee in those.
Right, I know it tastes like there isn't. But yeah, just think about that bitter, sweet, spiced pumpkin.
Yeah, I
all
suppose.
Of that.
If it wasn't such a most popular drink ever for the fall time, why wouldn't it work? It's just that I don't picture a pumpkin bread. When I think of pumpkin bread, I don't think of complex layered flavors.
Right.
So I would never think to put espresso powder in it, but I'm sure it would add another dimension to it.
As common as pumpkin bread is, it is very complex and layered because you have the pumpkin flavor, which is light, but then you have all these spices, the vanilla, the cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, whatever's in that mix that you're using.
Yeah.
That spice mix, whatever your blend is for your bread. So my question is, because I haven't ever had a pumpkin bread with espresso in it, is it very flavor forward? Can you taste the espresso? Or is it subtle and a part of the spice blend?
Yeah, I would think now, am I eating pumpkin flavored coffee? By coffee cake, I mean coffee flavored cake. I think what it should be is a very subtle flavor, like the way Army is saying. I'd be very interested to try it. I haven't tried that before.
Well, guess what? At the end of today's episode, we are gonna try some pumpkin bread made with espresso, but we're also gonna have one that doesn't have espresso powder in it and do another blind taste test.
We get to wear our masks again.
We get to wear those awesome masks again. We just really wanted to get our money's worth from Amazon.
I think I still have mine.
Oh, perfect. Well, moving on, another little or not a little, another trend on TikTok is little treat culture. And I wanted to know if either of you have ever heard of this. And if you hadn't, I'll fill you in. Basically, little treat culture, what is this idea? It started on TikTok as this idea to like justify buying yourself that $8 coffee. Like, just do it. You deserve it, is like kind of the emphasis behind it. And then it's obviously grown. Like, if you do even the simplest of tasks, it's like, oh, I deserve a little treat.
So what's an example of a little task that would deserve a little treat?
Perfect example is like literally last night I was on TikTok and this guy was like, little treat culture's getting too intense. I just filled up my water bottle before bed and I thought, I deserve a little treat. So I grabbed a cookie from the kitchen. Like, or like, I see a lot of my friends who are performers, actors, they go on an audition like in the morning and, they get cut right away. They're like, well, I did the audition, so I'm going to get a little treat, like that kind of thing. Or,
That's
you do
self-soothing.
Yeah. Or you do an errand or like maybe you cross off, 2 things on your to-do list and you're like, well, now I can go get a little treat.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know what would be your go-to little treat? Like where would you go and get to reward yourself?
I would say, number one, if I had that mentality, a little treat mentality,
Yeah.
I would be double the size. Because I like to think that every day I have a big task list and I get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah.
I would say ice cream because it's easy, it's accessible. You can have it in your house or outside of your house.
Have a little spoon of it.
And it's just and it doesn't have to be a lot and it's a real treat.
Do you have a favorite brand?
I do. I love Tillamook. And I love Jenny's ice cream. I'm very fond of some Ben and Jerry's flavors. Cheesecake Ben and Jerry's, one of my favorites. If it was a big treat, I would get myself a tub of strawberry cheesecake Ben and Jerry's.
Ooh, that sounds so good. And what about you?
Well, if it's just at my house and I'm checking off a to-do list and I feel like I deserve a little treat, I suppose I'd probably grab a cookie or make one since I usually have frozen dough in my freezer. That would be my go-to little treat. I love cookies. If I'm out at running errands and if I felt like I deserved a little treat, usually my go-to at a coffee shop would be a plain croissant, but a good bakery, not one that's been sitting around, like one that's flaky and crispy. There's a couple of bakeries near me that they're out of this world. They're outstanding. That would be my.
That's a nice treat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Tianna, what would your treat be?
Well, you're going to be shocked, but it does have to do with blueberries. But there is a coffee shop here in Toluca Lake where they are known for their iced blueberry coffee. It's called Priscilla's. I think I talk about it all the time. I usually have one with me. It's so good. It's like iced coffee, blueberry infused, and I just get it black. And it's kind of far from my house, so like that's my justified little treat. Like I'll drive 20 minutes. I'll go get it. So that's mine. So yeah, that is my go-to little treat. And we have a queen of little treats, and that is the self-proclaimed queen of desserts, Anne Hathaway. I don't know if either of you remember a few years ago, she was doing an interview on the Kelly Clarkson show where she demonstrated how her preferred way to eat a cupcake, where she like takes the bottom of the cupcake off and puts it on top and makes like a little sandwich, and it went viral and everyone talked about it. Well, the Kelly Clarkson show just recently like re-released a different interview with her, continuing to talk about desserts, and she had some really interesting things to say, so I wanted to share them with you. So she starts off by saying like, I'm really good at ordering desserts, and if she doesn't get dessert envy because like if she wants multiple desserts, she'll get one of each, or she'll order both desserts, try them all. But then this is the thing that was pretty interesting that she said is when she's out to eat at a restaurant, she says, if the bread isn't good, like they'll bring you like complimentary bread. If the bread isn't good, don't bother ordering the cake.
So I have 2 thoughts about this. The bread baker is in a kitchen generally different from a pastry chef. So often to be defined as a baker or a pastry chef are 2 different things. Often they will be 2 different jobs and those people won't mix. It's a different skill set. So it might not always be the same person making bread as it is your creme brulee. Now, that being said, Some people, a lot of restaurants don't make their own bread. Even high-end restaurants, they don't make their own bread. They buy it in. It's cheaper because they go to distributors, they go to these kitchens, and they are supplying a lot of like high-end restaurants in the area, and they will just order it. It's so much cheaper to be able to buy it in. That being said, if whoever is in charge of bringing in the bread or making the bread doesn't have the same high standard quality for the bread, then maybe I wouldn't, maybe the desserts might be a little bit questionable. I would say, and I watched the clip, and just so you know, you can watch the clip in the show notes, is that you do have to get good at reading dessert menus. Are you good at reading dessert menus, Tommy?
I don't know that I've ever thought of it.
I'm really good at reading them. Number one, I've written them. I wrote them for a few years. I'm really good at reading them, at the style of how they're written. If there's any spelling mistakes or punctuation, I would say punctuation, or anything like that, and then the style of the verbiage that they use to describe desserts.
Oh, interesting.
Just if a cake comes with 5 different things, do I actually want that cake? Do I want a creme brulee with a little biscuit on the side, or just a plain vanilla creme brulee? Like, more than likely, yes. Do I want something that comes with a million different things? Like, probably not. So I think just become more aware of what you're ordering, and also check out a menu, see if it's seasonally appropriate. All of these things should be, for a good chef, come into consideration. If they're not in consideration, and you're getting peaches in December, then don't order those peaches.
I do agree that a lot of restaurants, even high-end ones, bring in their own bread, or bring in bread. They don't make their own bread in-house. So I think, I don't think that holds up. Sometimes the bread isn't good. Oftentimes I don't even eat the bread that's offered because I want to save my appetite for the food that's coming.
Right.
And I rarely find the bread to be excellent at a restaurant. If I'm going to a bakery where they're making their homemade bread, I think that's a different story. But I'm not going to a restaurant for the bread. And as for a dessert, I don't mind little bitty things on a dessert, like a cake with 5 different ingredients, especially if I'm at a very fancy high-end restaurant. I think all of those things are done with a light touch, done well. The one thing that always puts me off, if I look on a dessert menu in a restaurant and I see molten lava cake, I'm just like, that is so tired. I love it. It's delicious, but it is so overdone. Like, as soon as I see that, I'm like, they don't care what they put on their menu.
No, and then often, which is quite common in restaurants, you won't find it in very high-end restaurants, but is that there will be no pastry chef. Sometimes there is a server. Whoever the server is for your table, he or she is the one going and putting store-bought, or these big cheesecakes that come from that are pre-made, that comes from companies, and they'll do cheesecake, they'll do a lava cake that goes into the microwaves for exactly 30 seconds or whatever it is. So there's actually no pastry chef in a lot of restaurants, and it's your server organizing it. The scoops of ice cream, the sorbet, like cheesecake is a really famous one, coffee cake, things like that.
Yeah. I was a server in high school, and I was the dessert preparer.
Crazy, right?
No qualifications to prepare them, but it was like always the molten chocolate cake and cheesecake and stuff.
Yeah. The stuff that's just sliced and you put on a plate, and you get, oh my gosh, raspberry coulis. They still do that in Ireland. It drives me bananas when I read that on a menu.
Well, I think it's good to know. I like the idea of knowing what to look out for on a dessert menu to help inform your decision. We're all going to be dessert ordering experts now.
Exactly.
Well, that is all I have this week from Hot from the Oven. So thank you both. And I want to move on into our In the Mix topic as we approach more of cold weather, even though it doesn't get that cold here in Los Angeles, but just colder weather as the temperature tries to drop. I want to talk about cold weather baking. So what I mean by that is, how does the temperature outside, how does maybe a lack of humidity, things like that, maybe it's your region where you are, how does weather affect your baking?
So from my personal experience, I lived in Tahoe for the first year when I moved to the United States. And Tahoe is a mountain town and it is famous for its ski slopes. And I was there for the full year, so I experienced the seasons. And if we were expecting a snowstorm one night, I would go into work at 2 o'clock in the morning. And the bakery that I worked in it was actually, I think, probably one of the worst jobs I ever had. Probably one of the worst jobs I ever had. Maybe I'll talk about that another day. But it was in the basement of a casino in South Lake Tahoe. And long story short, if it had snowed or we had a real like chilly spell, that all the doughs would be really sluggish when we would go in at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we would have to like maybe even move them the night before when we knew the snow was coming to different parts of the kitchen to make sure that they would stay warm. Because one thing that yeasted doughs need is they need to be comfortable, they need to be warm, they need to be able to like thrive in a nice environment. And the freezing temperatures would not kill the dough, but it would make it so that the process so much longer and laborious, and you would just spend your whole morning trying to get them to wake up. And when you're making big doughs that could be 40, 50 pounds, that's a lot of dough, and it's cold. That's a lot of dough to try and wake up. So yeah, it does really make a difference. In somewhere like Ireland, it would never get that cold to really affect it. And at home when you're making yeasted doughs, you always say like put them in the warmer spot of your kitchen. Sometimes we put them in a preheated oven. Ami and I do that a lot. A preheated oven for a few minutes and then off again, and chuck in your bread. And then humidity does play a big role. I don't know much about this firsthand because I never lived in a very humid climate. But when we started to do recipes that involved egg whites like pavlovas and macarons, we would hear from people in different parts of Asia that they said that they were trying so hard to make macarons, and for the life of them, they couldn't get it to work. And unfortunately, depending on the day, it might never work because of the humidity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that humidity for things like egg whites and meringues, it is a killer. So they couldn't get to form that dry skin. There was just too much moisture in the air, like made it very difficult.
How would you, going really quickly back to the bread with the cold, like you say you try to wake it up, like how?
We would put it in warmer parts of the kitchen. And then what we would do is you could put it on a machine and turn it. And then often what we would do, once you start to chop it up and put it into loaves and rolls, the process will move along faster. But during those times when we knew bad weather was coming, we would put them into the warmest spot of the kitchen to make sure that when somebody arrived in at 1 o'clock in the morning, that they weren't near death.
Frozen. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also like for a home baker, when your kitchen is very cold. My sister lives in Vermont, and they bake bread all the time, and their house isn't always fully heated. Heated in parts, but and so up high, heat rises. So if you've got a spot, on a high shelf, if you can clear a spot, it's always going to be a little bit warmer. Also, turn on your oven for 2-3 minutes, not that long. Turn it off, make sure you turn it off, and then you put your bread in there, and that should jog things along. Definitely. The other way you can do it is you can put, again, in the oven, it's an insulated environment. You can put a big pot of boiled water in there too, and it'll create sort of a moist, warm environment as well.
So similar to baking in cold weather, what would be some advice on how to transport your baked goods in cold weather? So let's say you live somewhere like Tahoe or Vermont and you're going somewhere, you're bringing the dessert and you have to bring it in and out of the cold. Like how would you keep it warm if you don't have the option of heating it up there?
Yeah. That's a tough one. Like I think if I were doing that and I had to travel with something and the dessert had to be hot, I probably would make a crock pot recipe, plug it out, bring it with me, and then stick it in when I got it into the guest's house. Otherwise, I think I would stay away from anything that had to be hot. I remember one Thanksgiving here in my house, we asked people to bring things, and one guest was bringing a side dish of Brussels sprouts, but I didn't realize that when he showed up, he was going to be cooking it in my kitchen when there was so much everything else going on. And hindsight is 2020, but I wouldn't show up to somebody else's house. Just an FY. This is just from my perspective. If you're bringing the dessert, show up with it ready. Like bring a cheesecake, bake a chocolate cake. Maybe bring tubs of ice cream and some cookies like Ami recommended there, I think in our last episode. But I wouldn't be showing up with something that I need to stick in people's oven when they have a turkey and a ham and stuffing and all the things.
Right. I mean, you would have to clear it with the host if you want to reheat something. I would say that most desserts don't, there are many desserts that don't have to be piping hot. A lot of desserts are really good room temperature. Just think about a crisp, which is nice when it's warm, but it's also delicious when it's room temperature. I'm trying to think about like what has to be piping hot, but if there's something I'm not thinking of, say a bread pudding, you want to bring a bread pudding and it has to be warm. I will interrupt myself to say, how often are you showing up where people just eat dessert right away? But maybe you are, maybe you're showing, usually you're showing up with dessert and there's going to be a meal first. So again, you're going to run the risk of it not being piping hot. But that being said, to answer the question, if I was to take a bread pudding out of the oven and I wanted to serve it hot, I would probably wrap it in some foil, wrap it in some warm towel or in some towels, and then put it in a cooler because the cooler's insulating. So it's going to keep the cold things cold. But if you put something hot in the cooler, it's going to also keep that warmer environment.
That's a good idea.
It's not going to be piping hot by the time you eat it, unless you are literally taking it out of your oven, driving it somewhere, and then eating it immediately. Hey, life is short. Eat dessert first.
Yeah.
Get to everything else.
Can I say that it would be piping hot if you made it in a crock pot?
There you go. You could do. Can you do bread pudding
in a? Of course you can.
Oh,
and
well,
you
there
could do
you go.
crisps in a crock pot.
How do you get
and
the top?
It does. It all cooks, and it doesn't. But it doesn't get crispy
Then
on
it's
the top.
no.
It's really good on me.
No,
Okay.
no, not a crisp.
We're
no.
not going to come to my crisp party
I
at my house in
disagree.
Vermont then.
I got it. Just bring those frozen molten chocolate lava cakes from the restaurants.
Yeah. Pop them in the microwave.
Pop them in the microwave and you're good.
I would. I mean, I'd say just eat it room temperature. It'll be delicious.
Yeah, make your life easier. Bring a cheesecake.
Yeah. Don't bother me.
Well, thank you both so much for all your insight on cold weather baking. One of my favorite things about the Bold Baking Network is that there's a whole team of professional bakers and chefs and experts who are in this community. And so we're going to hear from some of them now on what they think about cold weather baking.
Hey there, I'm Baker Bettie. I'm a trained chef and baking educator, and one of the things I commonly see people have issues with as we are moving into the cold winter months is with their bread dough rising. And I think a lot of people really underestimate how sensitive yeast is to temperature. So yeast is a living organism and it moves a lot quicker when it's warm, but it really slows down as it gets colder. So as you are baking in the winter, you really want to allow a little extra time for your bread dough to rise. Your recipe is going to give you a timeline for how long things should take to rise, but I really want you to see them as just a guideline because if your kitchen is really cold, things are going to take a little longer to rise. I also like to create a little faux proofer with my oven. So I will turn the oven on with nothing inside of it for about 1 minute, and then I'll turn the oven off, and then I can put my bread dough in there, and that just quick little heating of the oven will make it warm enough that it will kind of get the yeast moving, but it won't be too hot to kill the yeast as the bread is rising. So as you're baking bread in these winter months, just allow a little extra time for yourself, see your bread recipes as guidelines, and you will have beautifully fluffy bread. Bye.
We're back with the Bold Baking Hotline, where we are answering questions directly from our audience. So up first, we have from Shoma R. How could I ship a fruitcake or cheesecake? Would you need to vacuum seal it?
That's a great question. I do think that those are two very different things because one of them is cold and soft and the other one needs to be refrigerated and the other one is not. So let me talk about the fruit cake and then maybe Ami, you can do the cheesecake because I get
the hard one.
Sorry. Because I will tell you, sometimes I have really smart ideas. Sometimes not all the time, but sometimes like when I'm like, oh wow, that was a really smart idea. So I had a whole pile of cheesecake left over from our holiday shoot that we did. No, sorry. I had a whole pile of fruit cake left over from our holiday shoot that we did. And nobody wants fruit cake in August. And I didn't really know what to do with it, but I did not want to waste it because they're so expensive to make. So I cut it into wedges and I froze the cake. And then, just for a few hours, not long. And then I took the cake and I vacuum sealed it. So then it kept all its shape. It was perfectly intact. And now it can be frozen in those little bags in my freezer. And then when it comes to the holidays, I'll take up the bag. I'll let it, and then I'll gift it. There's a British couple down the road from me here. I know some more British people here in the Valley. And my George's nanny is Irish. Like, people who like fruitcake. I have some customers, but it'll be totally fine in your freezer. And you know what? Even with fruitcake, you don't even have to put it in your freezer. But I would recommend, if you're going to vacuum seal it, do. And I will say, if you are in the business of shipping desserts and sending people's desserts, years ago, for Christmas, I've had the best success when I tell Kevin exactly what I want, and he's had the best success. And I asked one year for a food saver. The brand is called Food Saver because I love to vacuum seal stuff. If I have leftover cookie dough, if I'm marinating chicken breasts, I like to marinate them, then put them in the bag, vacuum seal, and then put them in the freezer. I do it all the time. I buy big bags of meat and I break up the meat and I do different sauces and whatever, and I freeze it. And then with my desserts, I'm always freezing cakes and cookies and things like that. So if you are like me and a little bit crazy, then I would say a vacuum sealer. They're around, I think, less than $100, and they are so fantastic, and you will have less waste because of them.
Wow. Yeah. Well, if you are appliance averse like me, and you want to vacuum seal something, you can do something that is probably not as sealed, but you can put it in a Ziploc and put a little straw, seal it mostly, put a little straw there, suck out the air, and then close it up. It's pretty good.
I've heard that's a really good tip.
So don't worry if you don't have a vacuum sealer. But going back to cheesecakes, my first answer would be don't ship a cheesecake. But okay, all right. If you want to ship a cheesecake,
really need it.
Okay, so you know what? Maybe you need to ship a cheesecake. Like maybe you want to send it to somebody who loves your cheesecake and they don't live near you. Freeze it first. Cheesecake freezes really well and defrosts really well. So first you want to get that as cold and hard as possible. Then there are special boxes that you can buy. I think online. I don't know if you can get these at the post office, but you'd have to do a little research, and they are cheesecake shipping boxes.
Actually, cheesecake boxes?
Or cake shipping boxes. Maybe they're just
they're really insulated.
They're insulated. So the thing with a cheesecake is it's highly perishable. It has to stay cold. You can pack it with dry ice. If you do use dry ice, you have to make sure that the bag of dry ice is not sealed. It's closed but not sealed. And why you don't want to use regular ice is because regular ice will melt and turn into water. Dry ice sublimates, so it turns into gas. So you're not, so you're not going to make a package wet. Yeah. Dry ice will also keep the cheesecake, hopefully, depending on how long it's being shipped and how far, it will hopefully keep it still frozen by the time it gets to its destination. And you want to ship it quickly. This is not cheap. From the research that I did, it's probably going to cost you $50, $60 to do this whole thing. So, if it's something super special occasion, you make a cheesecake like nobody else makes it and somebody wants it. You could do it.
I think also gel packs. I've received stuff with gel packs, and the good thing about those is that they're reusable. Not to you because they're gone, right. But maybe that other person. I will say, just print off the recipe, stick it in an envelope, and
mail the recipe.
Just send the recipe.
Here's $50. Go buy the ingredients. Yeah.
Save yourself. It seemed like, honestly, like, unless it was like your mom's cheesecake. Yeah. Like it's a lot of, that's for a cold dessert, like that's a lot of trouble.
Well, our second question is a little bit similar. It's from Greg N. And he asks, is it best to overnight baked goods, and how long are they good in a box? Or how long are they good in a box? And this one I think has to kind of do with like holiday cookie shipping, probably.
Okay, well, that's easier. Cookie shipping is way easier. I've got a post on my website about shipping cookies over the holidays. I will say vacuum seal to keep their shape. keep their freshness. It's really good. And yes, overnight them. Even if they are a drier cookie like a shortbread that can last a few days, overnight them. I've done this a lot when I bought out my second cookbook. When around the holidays, when we have partners that we work with, and I would send them like baked cookies. Vacuum seal them, keep it, keep the package light, keep it flat, and overnight.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for answering those questions. That is all I have from the Bold Baking Hotline. And I think it's now time for us to go to our favorite new segment, our blind, bold taste test.
I'm ready.
We're gonna go get our 2 pumpkin breads, one with espresso powder and one without, and see if we can tell the difference.
Yeah. Okay, ladies. So mask up.
Okay.
We're talking about pumpkin bread here. One has espresso and one does not. I will say that this is my pumpkin bread, my best ever pumpkin bread. So no comments about the bread, just about the espresso.
If we can taste the espresso,
Yes.
got it.
Okay.
On your left is number 1
Okay.
and on your right is number 2.
All right.
All right. Are we going?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I am anyway.
Big old bite.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where it is. Oh, here it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to sit away from the microphone so you
I
can
know,
hear
me
me
too.
chewing.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Okay.
All right. Second one?
Yeah.
Okay. And over here.
Okay.
There's espresso in one of these. Mm,
Okay.
very subtle.
It is subtle. I'd say take another little bite if you feel that way.
Mm-hmm. I can't find it. Oh no! Oh, here it is.
Okay. I can taste it.
Maybe the first one has espresso.
Okay. Oh.
Do you have your mask up?
I do.
Oh, off?
Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be funny. That was really hard.
I think that does the first one have espresso?
So Kevin just told me he knew the answer. And number 1 is the espresso one.
Mhm.
And number 2 is not.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a bit of a slight color difference to the first one. But I do taste the espresso, but it is mild. But I definitely find there's more going on in the espresso one than there is number 2. I have to say though, number 2 is tasty.
I think the espresso really enhances some of the flavors without having an espresso taste, but it was so subtle that I would like to see it with a little more. So I don't know how much espresso was put in this cake, but I think it could handle at least double the amount of espresso so that you have a little bit of that pleasing coffee bitterness to balance out the sweetness of the cake.
One time, Gemma made me cookies. It was my first time here. She made me cookies and was telling me how she like let them sit in her freezer for a while. And I felt like when we talked about it, it was like almost like I was hyper aware of all the flavors in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like that same.
You could sense that there was more going on in it.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's good.
I think a little bit more espresso, but I did taste the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do we think, yay or nay? I think, meh.
Oh, well, I think you say that because there's not enough espresso in here. I would say that put more in. I would say double it, and I think you'd love it.
Yeah, and I think if you have espresso powder, like, why not?
Yeah.
Like, why not?
Yes,
Does it
because,
need it?
not only does there like a little bit of bitterness, but if these are both otherwise the same recipe, you can also, the espresso cake tastes a little more buttery. It tastes a little more salty in a good way. It has a little bit more flavor all around.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's a great addition.
Okay.
Very
Sounds good.
Oh, I
Mommy's
learned
going to do
something
that in
new
her
today.
house.
Mm.
I might not do it in mine. Whatever. Tianna, take us out.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, you can always watch every episode of Need to Know on YouTube.
From HRN and the Bold Baking Network, you are watching the Need to Know Baking Entertainment podcast.